You're trying to go live to Facebook, right?
Yep.
Okay,
You're live.
Thank you.
got it. Okay, hold on one second. All
It's
right,
the-
you are good to go.
Well, welcome everyone. Bienvenidos. Good day, good evening, good timing for you to be with us today, wherever you are in the world, for our 31st week of Cultivating Voices live poetry and our new books showcase, featuring poets whose books came out just before or during the pandemic. I'm your host, Sandy Yanone. I'm the author of Boats for Women from Salmon Poetry. Cultivating Voices live poetry began at the end of March in response to the shutdowns and has developed into an international, intersectional, intergenerational reading series and poetry community that now alternates weeks between a live open mic and today our new books showcase. 3 readers, 15 minutes apiece, and by invitation, but any of our members can request a reading, and we occasionally have a special event. And so please double check. I'll be announcing our lineup for the month of November, which is truly spectacular at the end of the program today. We're a public group, and all poets and all beloveds of poetry are welcome to join and participate in our really dynamic poetry community that I'm so grateful has been assembling over these past few months. Well, now to today's new book showcase and the poets. While I am not currently in possession of any of their books, and I say currently because they're en route, I am so honored today to welcome Megan Alpert, Patrick Lodge, and Anne McDonald. I'll introduce each as they read, and after Anne, I'll have the pleasure of introducing you to our special surprise guest, who will read a final poem or two for our month of October. This is our last reading of October. As we look ahead to our first reading in November, and which will be a live special event, a spectacular reading from Lost Horse Press, their anthology called Nasty Women, with your host, Julie Kane, and a really incredible pageant of poets. And if you were here for our Lily Ledbetter reading, Lost Horse Press is the same press that put that anthology together. So be on the lookout for that. Well, our first reader today is Megan Alpert, who joined us during our National Coming Out Day reading, our Poetry March, earlier this month. And I've really been looking forward to her book for months when I had first learned about it on another Facebook group that I belong to. So I was thrilled to be able, when Megan joined Cultivating Voices, and that we've been able to celebrate Megan's collection, The Animal at Your Side, which won the Airlie Prize from, and that's the press she's publishing with, and was also a finalist for the National Poetry Series. Her poems have appeared or are forthcoming in Copper Nickel, Colorado Review, Muzzle, Tinderbox Poetry Journal, Crab Orchard Review, and many, many others. Would you please welcome Megan Alpert?
Thank you so much, Sandy. Thank you for that warm introduction. Thanks for inviting me to read and for putting together Cultivating Voices. I'm really excited to be here. And I just want to show everybody my book. This beautiful painting was done by my friend Sarah Everett, whose art I've been fascinated with for a long time. So I'm going to start with the first poem of the book. This is called Dawn. My sister comes home, smelling of dirt she was buried in. Dandelion milk under her nails. We wash her arms, scrub her fingers with stinging soap, but still she is not clean. When she finally speaks, it's, hand me that trowel, and I'll bury the seeds. While upstairs, our grandmother paces the attic. Will I wake anywhere besides this house, or love anyone ever beyond my sister with the skinned knees? I wake again in the garden, crushing stems against my teeth. So the book has a couple of different threads that kind of run through it and have sort of their own arcs. And one of them is that thread of this question, will I wake anywhere besides this house? And there's these sisters that appear in the poems, and one of them is always leaving and one is staying behind. So I'm going to read another one of those sister poems. This one is called A Vacancy. The girl on the highway, don't tell her. Clock her vacancies in the grandfather across the hall. Set the eaves by her. Did she forget the crystal vases, the oak stained dark, the nothing ever breaks here? We meet in the highway blackness. She street grins, walks backward against the lights. She thinks she comes from the Green Mountains, out there. But the mantle cries out for her pictures. Her room, in a hoarse voice, calls her name. Don't let her hear. Don't trap her. Keep her from the roaring of mantles, this more than heavy silence of plates. Let's say I was there when the goose bit her knee and she was carried crying up the hill. Say I was with her when she hurled a crab across the beach and I kicked sand into her eyes. Say we had the same parents, that she was the golden child and I was skinny, runtish, and mean. Say she tried to get me up a tree, into a cartwheel, over a chain link fence, but my body couldn't. Say she tried to rescue me, unfeeling and cold, only through the eyes of a sister that never was. So there's like a different ways in the book that the narrators sort of try to make poems for themselves. And one of the poems is actually about about but not about a roommate that I had years ago who I was sort of fascinated with, and she just kind of had this like easy confidence, and I was just sort of like, how do you do that? And so I wrote this like semi-creepy poem about her that used to be called Roommate, but the title is now If She Drinks. If she drinks a cup of fire, I dream a mouth of fire. I find myself absently caressing her toothbrush. In her room, she pulls dead leaves off the sapling. True, I was scared. I thought I might be hated or smothered in my sleep. But when I woke up Saturday morning, all the dishes folded in their cupboards, it felt right to have another animal moving in the house. Sometimes I dream there is a third room we discover, full of permanent furniture. I reach into the medicine chest and pull out the half jaw she keeps there, dry and white. Then I drink some of her tea. She's in the other room, writing something down. I break a glass. The door to her room falls open. The furniture tells me she is kind and absent, offers some small pieces I can add to my mouth. So those are all the sistery poems I'm gonna read. And I'm gonna kind of have a little intermission from the animal at your side, the voice of the animal at your side, and read a much newer poem that I wrote for, I was on a radio show recently where I had to write a poem specifically for the show, which was like quite a challenge for me because I had a week and then I had to share it live. And I wrote it about a job that I used to have. I worked with children for most of my 20s. And so anyway, the radio show is called The Occasion, if you want to listen to it. And my pressmate, Jennifer Perrine, is the person who forced me to write this poem. It's called Respite. I drove through eerie marshlands, looped south on highways to reach east, got lost in the mazes of towns I am not at liberty to name. I signed a contract the first week at the job. I'd never say anything about the 5 children I cared for, and once I left, I would never contact them again. Boundaries, they said. You needed what the trainer called emotional leather, and I had none. The kids I gathered and drove with me through evening stop and go traffic had none either. They barely had skin. I took them for 3 hours each, once a week, to empty playgrounds, amusement parks, fast food restaurants, animal shelters, anywhere they wanted to go. I want to tell you about them, to make them live forever in your mind, because they deserve that. But they deserve to hide if they want, to be as anonymous as any girl sailing past a drive-thru. I'll tell you this, there was nothing wrong with any of them, except being wounded. When I left the job, the pain I caused did something to me I can't describe. I want to include in this poem for each of them a folded note that only they would recognize. I don't know what I became to them in memory. Maybe another adult the state sent to make up for what they were not given. A piece of the tattered net meant to wrap the ways we refuse to care for each other. But I am here in this poem to tell them that every big gulp, every perfectly round orange in the palm of a hand, every secret whispered in a deep museum, every silver guitar, every falter and brag, every hospital courtyard did not go unnoticed by me. I hold each still, like valuables in a pawn shop's glass case, waiting for the rightful owners to arrive. So, getting back to the book, there's this other thread that kind of runs through it of children, caring for children, and imagining having children. And this poem is about a kind of labor that people with uteruses wind up doing, which is the work of either having or not having children. And then not having children sometimes is a lot of labor too. This was written in response to an essay by Bridget Potter about having an abortion before Roe v. Wade. Her essay is called Lucky Girl. And this is called Holly 1962. I thought horizon was made up in stories. Even in the country, New York, hills and trees zip past the eye up close to the train I ride home or back. to the city, where something terrible would befall me. I was warned, and perhaps has. 3 weeks ago, I sat cooking in a scalding bath, Kevin pouring gin into my mouth to induce abortion. No luck. Now, $300 in my bra, on a plane to California, I see the earth receding to its side. So that's horizon. On the ground, it is a sideways spine, crossed by the uneven vertebraic trees. The same long line I trace down the hall where the tubular bulbs have yellowed out like bones, to the room where I lie on my back and listen for the scraping I am author to. Weeks of crying at my desk, a douche with soap, running up and down the stairs, the bath and gin, a visit to the witch with a folding table I ran from scared. Then, a name in my ear from a friend back home, the frantic push for money, the flight, and now the pain that tastes like metal, that crests to stay Holly, me, this Holly. I feel a pulling all through. Then I am packed with rags and bleeding in the cab. The sun and pain conspire, the hotel dark and yellow. I am dumb with it, all night listening to it, and for whether it will kill me. At the airport, the trees become long necks. Their hair fronds dangle far above the ground. In New York, the world comes close again. The same music pouring out of the same bars, the food familiar as my own body. Someday, at a party, a stranger will describe your trees, and I affect indifference as he makes the introduction. California, me, California. No one else in this city will know how we met. How am I doing on time here? Great, okay. So the book, like I said, there's these different threads, and there is a thread of sort of the ecstatic and the erotic that kind of runs through it. So I'm going to read one or two of those depending on time and my level of courage. 2 more, okay. So this is called Transition. If you had another body, maybe a stag, but the deer had to be a boy now, had to take a boy's ways and gestures. Childish to insist on the story, not the body, not the parts of you I don't know. When you enter me, my hooves trample the floorboards. The skeleton of a hoop skirt goes up in flame. The invisible in me, wrestling itself towards form. So since I started with the first poem of the book, I'm gonna end with the last poem of the book. This poem is called Ayu, which I do not know how to pronounce correctly. It's a Hebrew word, and the word means both oak tree and stag, and also probably has a few other meanings that I don't know. Hebrew words have like a number of different meanings. So yeah, this is called Ayu. And one day, the tree reveals its blue-green flame. You see the antlers at the center have raised themselves to your very face. You go on from there, the animal at your side. That's all. Thanks so much for having me.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Well, Megan, I'm just going to say to you candidly, even though I am in front of a lot of other people, I can see why that book was a finalist for the National Poetry Series.
Thank you.
Really, really gorgeous. Thank you so much, and congratulations on your new book, The Animal at Your Side. Why don't you put it up for us one more time so we can see it there? And that really, the very arresting cover also. From Airly Press. Folks, you're listening to Cultivating Voices Live Poetry, our new books showcase today. Please support the poets and their presses by purchasing books. We do have the links on our Facebook page. Our dutiful Elizabeth Ann, my sister, those sister poems really struck a chord for me, of course, as well, is putting up links for the books. Of course, only if you're able. You know, we know the times we're in, but if you have the resources, why wouldn't you want to spend money on a book of poetry? What better thing could you spend it on other than maybe a fox balloon? Anyway, obviously I'm a little trickster today. Next, I'm equally thrilled to welcome Patrick Lodge for his first Cultivating Voices reading with us. Patrick learned about Cultivating Voices Live poetry, I'm not sure how, and reached out to me and contacted and then joined the group, and we set up the reading. So I want to let you know that, you know, if you have a new book, it is perfectly acceptable to let me know, and we will book you for a new book showcase reading. You know, I'm not a clairvoyant. I don't know when your new book necessarily comes out. I don't read all the catalogs religiously of all the presses. I am not all knowing about poetry or anything for that matter. So it is a great way, a grand way for you to be able to showcase your new book. And we are very, very happy to have you do it, as I am certainly happy that Patrick did. Patrick Lodge is from an Irish Welsh heritage. His work has been published in several countries. Patrick has won numerous poetry competitions, including a very recent prestigious award, which I hope he'll mention, and has read by invitation at festivals in the UK, Ireland, Kosovo, and Italy. He has 3 collections with Valley Press, including his latest. I love the title of this book, Remarkable Occurrences. Would you please welcome Patrick Lodge?
Thanks very much, Sandy. Am I okay? You can hear me? Good. I'm going to read some poems from the new book, Remarkable Occurrences, and I'll end with one that isn't in that book that was a competition winner recently. And I'll start with one called Vernal Equinox. I live in the middle of the country here in Yorkshire, and I cycle and walk around a lot, particularly since we've been locked down for months. And this poem was on the day, the vernal equinox, when the day is 12 hours and the night is 12 hours. And I was out early in the morning and I came across a dead hare in the road. Vernal equinox. I swear I saw the spirit of the hare, festal in the half of day that now becomes night, rise up from the bloodshot tarmac, from the bleeding bones, gather in complete and lithe, ears raised, nose twitching, eyes seeing clear, unmoving for a moment, then springing aloft, transparent, unbroken, faultless, ascending through air to fire that consumes breath itself, a filament, a thread, shining in the firmament, embedded above a light alone, pure. I swear, I saw. I spend a lot of time going around the countryside on my own, so some of these poems are somewhat strange. But here's one that isn't. The nearest city to me is York, which you might have heard of. It's very beautiful, medieval, well, Roman city, very good for tourists. And it's got a cathedral. It's actually York Minster. And there's a cafe behind it where I often sit. It's a good source of poetry because you just get so many people walking past. And this poem is called The Greatest of These, and it was written or drafted sitting in the cafe. So it's called The Greatest of These. A couple came out of the darkness under the arch, chatting non-stop, maybe flirting. The great east window, scaffold free, transfigured in the sun. Without a pause in the chit-chat, as if compelled, one raised a phone, like an oblation, clicked off a shot. I was dismissive. How could pixels comprehend the moment she was in? A stock image was no substitute for her being there, completed, true, senses, spirit, soul as one. Then the ultimate cliche, a gurning selfie against the soaring cathedral. But as she leaned back, the better to frame gargoyle or saint, balance was lost. And intuitively, her escort steadied her with a hand to the back. There was the beginning and end of it. An act of almost sexual choreography, carrying such a sensation of love, such intimations of profound intimacy, that all who witnessed must be humbled. They walked on past my cafe table, laughing and arms linked, in step, so close they must seem to each other to be holding on to themselves. Oh, it's really great to be here. Not so much in Yorkshire, but it's really great to be kind of international and to have some involvement again with the United States. So thanks, Andy. Thanks everyone involved. Marvelous. Third poem is called On a Boat with Scully. Scully being, of course, from the X-Files, which I'm sure you'll all know. Now, the background to this poem is that last year I had some heart issues. It turned out to be nothing at all. But while I was having the heart issues or waiting for it to be told that there was nothing, I kept getting a recurring dream. And the dream was about Scully. I used to watch the X-Files with my son, but I didn't realize how much I'd committed to my deepest memory. And there's a particular one that I kept having this recurring dream about, in which Scully is in a coma and has to make a decision about whether to return to the world or not. For X-Files buffs, it's series 1, episode 4, if you want to follow it up later. But anyway, this is called On a Boat with Scully. I want to remember how it all was. I sat with Scully on a boat without oars, tethered to the jetty, a shroud laid umbilical, reefed to the world. We argued. She'd been here before. Loosen that knot, You'll never get back to the shore. I caught a drift, but maybe there are no choices to be made, no signs to point away. The lake was deadpan. A breath would barely fog the mirror calm. I don't see Scully now, but I want to believe, except it's all unraveling as a strand loses the tide. I'm unremembering all those moments which coasted me to this boat on this lake. Eyes closed, opening only once to look. That's where I've been all this time. Reach for the rope. Let's go. Out there? Out there. So thank you, Gillian Anderson, for that one. This poem, I'm actually halfway between the cities of York and Leeds. Chalk and cheese, completely different cities. Leeds is a marvelous city in many respects, not least for its generosity to refugees and asylum seekers. And for a time, a few years ago, I worked as a volunteer in an organization that helped asylum seekers. And there were a lot of asylum seekers from Syria. And although I didn't work with them and didn't meet them, their stories were quite often in the press. And this is a poem called Eastern Ghouta, which is based on some of those stories, I suppose. That was the suburb of Damascus, the first suburb that the Assad regime destroyed, really, with Russian help. Eastern Ghouta. She dusts off the wooden box her mother gave in another life. A star emerges in the cellar gloom, interlaced strips of dreams, seen now only in veneers, peach, apricot, walnut, rose, inlaid, lustrous as evening brushed hair. Look at this, daughter, and be calmed, her mother said on that special day. She opens the box, takes out a lipstick, a shard of glass from her grandmother's mirror that had hung forever in the hall. Carefully, she paints her mouth. Rose-lipped wife, her husband smiled once. If he does not return and the soldiers come, she will use the glass. She will bloom again. Thank you. This is a love poem. I don't write many love poems. My wife says it's because I'm a high-functioning sociopath, but I'm not sure about that. I just don't think I write love poems, but there we go. But this is a love poem. I think Sandy mentioned I'd read at a festival in Kosovo. It was a very intense experience. And this was written or drafted when I leaving the festival on the airplane, actually. It's called What Remained, and it makes reference to a lot of Greek references, I suppose. Anyway, and one odd reference to something called a Carmine Lullaby, but that's actually the title of a book of poems by the woman to whom this poem is written. What Remained. All the flight I watched your smile, even at takeoff when all is suspenseful, when past and present mock pretensions of confidence. I looked at your eyes too. They were deeper than Lethe, never chill, but I could not forget anything. Certainly not the women who looked like you on the vineyard roof, close to the brink, or the women who held hands to dance in circles to the cliff edge, singing for themselves alone, in love, not desperation, whose eyes, though, were dead, whose smiles were fixed for a worse world, who placed their hopes only in the sustaining lightness of air, like that air which held a tiny cloud far below the plain, so lost between sky and parched earth, that I had to stare hard past the wing into the vivid sun, flooding the world with your carmine lullabies, so as not to cry for it, and for what remained. So light it could not be kept hold of. Arms had tried, and must, like love, eventually be freed. Thank you. Now, I've got two more, if that's okay. Again, this one's from the the book, and then I'll read the non-book one last. This is called Purusha. This is, before coronavirus, I used to travel a great deal, and I love traveling, particularly in India. And I was in southern India, and I had the most amazing massage in a garden by a woman who turned out was English, but could, well, just do fantastic massages. And it was a most peculiar experience. It was lovely. Anyway, this is Purusha. Purusha is part of a Hindu temple. In each Hindu temple, right at the bottom, the center, is basically a cube of air, which holds nothing, but in holding nothing, holds everything. Purusha. 3 cents you gave me. First, on your cupped palms, burning with cinnamon oil, held as if exposing wounds to doubters. Second, your perfume on my skin until the sea burnished me in the morning light. Third, a stub of temple incense, broken, each half lit at an understood but unspoken moment. This I recall, but here's the sense: how kneading muscles, working bones, you made me formless, shapeless, then built a perfect space, a womb house, where all that is essence quickens. Thank you. And the last one, which isn't in the book, is called Eye of Shark. And I heard a couple of weeks ago that I'd won the Manchester Cathedral Poetry Prize, and I'm officially Manchester Cathedral Poet of the Year, which I was immensely pleased to do. And the only kind of theme for the competition was, I think it said, write something vaguely spiritual. I'm more spiritually vague, but this is as close as I got. I was going to try and screen share, because the poem is based upon an installation by the Irish artist Dorothy Cross. I was in Lismore in Ireland at a poetry festival and went to see this installation, which consists of a dozen cast iron baths, which she'd taken from farms around the area. They've been used for water for animals. And she'd placed these in front of a tiny church window in which was the eye of a shark. And the installation was called Eye of Shark. And she'd gilded the scum lines around the baths. It was the most amazing piece of work. And the poem came out of it. I knew I'd write the poem straight away, as soon as I went up into what was a loft in the old farm there. And lots of farm workers had written their names, scratched them on the walls and scratched them on the beams. This is Eye of Shark. It's a theophany, like it or not. You could spend your life trying to duck the limelight, stay in the gloom, just trying to get on with it. Like Whelan, Lineen, Driscoll, Barry, who maybe saw the glory train coming to a Lismore loft, dark as a cleft in rock, hoped the luminous mystery would stay just that, leaden as their beam-scratched names. In truth, though, it's a cast iron cert that when the plug is pulled, everything is wasted. You can't keep your back turned. The light will seek you out, ravenous, like a shark sniffing blood in the water. There is no escape, nowhere to hide from the 360-degree eyeballing that sees all in black and white, an unblinking, providential stare, making all stark in its unyielding glare. Whelan, Lenine, Driscoll, Barry, maybe it was a relief for these pure hearts, chosen out of the shadows, reclaimed, bathed in uncreated radiance. See them in apostolic succession, rising gracefully as bathers emerging from a warm tub, all leaking auspicious light, beaming now, their inner alchemy a surprise even to themselves, snaking upward transmuted, fired and flensed, nothing left of their earthly selves, the parting gift, a gilded scum line, where air and water, flesh and spirit meet, where all has become one. Thank you very much, Sandy. Thank you.
What a wonderful reading. Thank you so much, Patrick Lodge.
Entirely my pleasure. Thank you.
A remarkable reading from your new book, Remarkable Occurrences. I love that story of the eye of the shark. I mean, it doesn't get more remarkable in terms of an occurrence than that story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so glad you joined us today, and please join us again and again. I was thinking earlier today how truly, how for me, these Sundays are really these spiritual occurrences. They are this opportunity to affirm humanity week after week after week,
Hmm.
when we've all been enduring many, many things. And your reading, Megan's reading, and I know Anne's upcoming reading, and our guests' reading, and all the poetry that we've heard week after week after week. This is our 31st week, our affirmations of that. And I'm so grateful every week. Well, I am also grateful now to be introducing a person that I adore. I have come to absolutely adore in these 31 weeks. It's incredible that I've met just all these amazing poets, but people over these weeks. And Anne MacDonald is right at the top of that list. Anne MacDonald is a spoken word poet whose work has been published in Ireland and in the UK and broadcast on RTE radio. Crow's Books is her debut collection from Savak Press in Dublin, Ireland. She was recently a prize winner in the Strokestown International Poetry Competition 2020. And Anne has performed in theaters in Dublin and London as part of the ensemble Women of Wit, where her work reflects her interest in the experience of women in society as it changes and her personal response to social justice. Would you please join me in welcoming the luminous Anne MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Sandy. I'm delighted you think I'm luminous. That's a beautiful compliment. And I'm going to do the typical Zoom. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay, brilliant. Delighted to be here, and to echo Patrick and Megan, it is such a fantastic opportunity. I say this all the time. We have Siobhan Potter and Dora Cypher in Ireland doing what Elizabeth Ann and Sandy are doing in the US, and somehow we've all linked up, which has been amazing. And I have to thank particularly Shark Press, which is the Irish word for hawk, and the editor and poet Muddy D. Norman for his tremendous encouragement and support and endless patience with me and my endless revisions. So Crow's books will be available very soon if I stop making changes, but definitely in time for your Christmas stocking. And the poems that I'm going to read tonight are all included in Crow's books. And the very last one, if I have time, I'll explain where the title came from. But this night last year, I was talking about serendipity. I was on a stage with Women of Wit, never thinking that I'd now be on a very different stage in my apartment. And little note to Sandy, in another room in this apartment, there's a series on the Titanic, which is just, I know. So sorry, I know I should really do this on front of my television so you could see that. But I just thought that's hilarious. So anyway, one of the things I didn't know existed this time last year was Zoom. I didn't know what it was, didn't know how to use it, did any of us. And as Sandy said, a lot of my writing is in reaction to the world and the changes that I see. And this one came out of, I've been on a few Zoom calls and I noticed some very flirty things going on. And this poem was written in response to that. It's called A Very Zoom Affair. She wished she thought to put a nicer dress on as she clicked on Zoom. She'd taken a YouTube class on how to minimize the glare of your glasses from your laptop. Then read a poem about how she enjoyed being alone, but also loved meeting new people, and how she hated sheeple and individuality was her thing. He read about what he had to bring to a new relationship. He took down the Man United poster from the wall of his son's bedroom and replaced it with a Modigliani print. He read a poem about having a spring in his step and a zing in his homemade COVID margaritas. She read in front of her kitchen window with her pots of basil and mint, complementing the blue of her new top. He could not stop reading about when he travelled as a young man and how age had made him wiser and more open to his feminine side. She told her friends that from what she could see, he was a big ride. She started wearing perfume to the online open mic nights, dimming the lights so that her wrinkles were depleted. He read about how proud he was that he'd completed the degree by night and how it was the right of everybody, woman or man, to an education. She read about how she loved the grounds of Trinity College in the winter. He read about how he didn't even feel the splinter in his heart now that his partner moved on, and how he longed for a relationship with a woman of culture. She read about a previous relationship with an energy vulture and how she now embraced the empty nest. He read about how he used yoga to lay all his demons to rest. She read about shopping online and how not all bullets need guns. He read about using puns to deliver a punch in a poem, and she read about nights when she would be alone, and he read about being on his own in his bed, and she dreamed of his words going round in her head, and he wished to fuck the barbers would open. She read about coping without getting her highlights done and how she was actually happy to be going grey. The day she knew the jig was up was when she wore suspenders in the open mic night under her leggings, and into the view of the screen came her husband's hand wrapped around a coffee cup, his wedding band glinting in the sun from the self-same kitchen window. "That's for yourself for doing the poetry," the husband said. Her face flushed fire engine red. She composed herself and read about ships in the night, and he read about ships that had just fucking sailed. She wailed loudly off camera that she was only having a bit of fun, and wasn't she entitled to just one little fucking bit of the house to herself. He decided not to read at the next open mic, but sat in front of a photo of him, his wife, his copy of Ulysses in full view of the camera on a hastily erected IKEA shelf. That's not a true story, I swear. So the next poem is a little bit sad, but it's based on a true story. And it's, my husband was a fisherman on a trawler here called the Caledonia Rose for many, many years. And he often talked about a journey that they made when they got the call to come back to shore, and it took 3 hours. And during that 3 hours, nobody knows on the boat who the bad news is for. And it's a very, very strange, bizarre time. And by a remarkable coincidence, or maybe not, I met a woman a few years ago who had lost a child to cot death. And she has started a beautiful business designing cards and you know, paintings. that bring healing and comfort to people in the same position. And I didn't like to tell her that actually I knew who she was, because it turns out it was the same woman. So it took me years to write this poem because it was such a delicate subject. But I showed it to her first a few months ago, and she was more than delighted with it, even though we both ended up crying. And I'm so proud that this is going to be in the collection. And it's to remember baby Ryan Minto, who was born on the 18th of April, 1996, and died in June 1996, aged 9.5 weeks. So the poem is called 3 Hours Out. We got the call 3 hours out to sea. I know that we were thinking all the same. I wonder, is it him or is it me? We had no choice but wait the hours out with endless cigarettes and cups of tea, too harsh for crackling radio to explain. I hoped that it was them and wasn't me. We made talk so small it meant nothing. The haul we got, the time we lost the nets, and when I won the each way bet, but still the time dragged every minute single out of 3 excruciating hours, coated in the sour smell of oilskins mixed with salt. I listed all the possibilities for heartache, knowing each man counted out the same. Was the family affected theirs, or was it ours? Strong men rendered naked in the rain. And as we turned for home and braced against the wind, a small crowd gathered silent on the quay. My head spun somewhere between fear and hope. I wished that it was them and wasn't me. Then our hearts broke for the man whose news it was, as hands reached down to haul him from the deck. Words whispered on the winds were cot and death. Feeling glad, then sickened with the shame, but knowing it was not my news to claim. We got the call 3 hours out to sea, and I wished it wasn't him, that it was me. Thank you. I know I nearly cry myself reading that, because it was such an unusual journey, and I've had a lot of response to that poem, that a lot of fishing families would have experienced something similar. So I feel a bit privileged very privileged to have been able to write it. So I'm going to change the tone a little bit slightly. Almost 30 years ago, I packed my whole life into the back of a truck. I can laugh now, it wasn't funny then. And I thought my whole world was over and the life was ending, and and I never thought that I would be here 30 years on reading a poem about this time in my life. But it's a very special time, because it's a time when I worked for many years in domestic violence and refuge, and when the spiral is broken, that's when women begin to heal. And not only women, men, of course, and anyone who's in a situation where they're not being treated as they should. So this is called A Good Wife and a Black Truck. The spiral was broken when she stopped pretending and started being honest. Is Bill there? He was due on shift at 6. Annette, the supervisor's voice was tentative and low. Maribel answered no. Try the pub. Her own voice was clear and strong. Oh, said Annette, right so. Oh, is a good word, Annette, said Maribel. Thank you for calling, and sorry if Golden Boy is late for work. And FYI, the baby is not sick, the dog is not in the vets, and all 4 tires on the car are fully inflated. Annette waited a moment, and then I said, I see. And then she said, I see. Well, Annette, it's 3:30 when he left the house. It takes 15 minutes from here to there, so I wouldn't hold out any hopes of him doing a shift anytime soon. By the way, you should take note, there is a full moon. The spiral shattered all over the carpet in the hall, and something lifted a breeze block off her chest. One down, Artemis, she said to the Cocker Spaniel, who wagged his tail but looked bewildered. She had the books, Feel the Fear, Change Your Life, The Best Life, The Absent Wife, but she knew that sometimes you really do have to do things afraid. The long black truck pulled up to the gate to wait until she filled it up with 5 years' worth of a miserable life as a dutiful wife. She left the washing machine, but took the large painting of a Japanese peacock and a miniature gold-faced wind-up clock. bin bags filled with clothes she later used for rags to clean the window in her new place, a safe space. The phone rang as she closed the door, and Artemis carried his own lead to the car. Did Pill get paid today, do you know? I don't, Joe, to be honest, and I have to go. As she drove away behind her life in the black truck driven by Pat the man, half truck, half van, who could and would shift anything, she had the sneakiest suspicion that Golden Boy would never see it coming and would be genuinely left in shock, up to his narcissistic balls in hock. Thank you. Now, another that to me is not a sad poem. It would have been if I read it years ago. This one, 5,000 people go missing in Ireland every year, and this poem is the poem that I was so happy was a prize winner. I won third prize in the Strokestown International Poetry Competition. But it's dedicated to everybody who ever lost somebody, and it's a phenomenon that I think in the UK the numbers are off the scale, but people go missing every year, 5,000 in a tiny, tiny country like ours. And this is dedicated to Mayanne Brady, whose son left home to go to school one morning and just never came home. And it's called Whose Coat? The coat in the hall is threadbare, and after 27 years, I still stop and stare at it, willing it to tell me what it knows, to tell me where you are or where you went when you went missing. Still hung on the same hook, the same sci-fi book poking out of the left pocket, a half-empty pack of amber leaf nestled in the right. At night, I touch the frayed edges of the sleeve and hear your words above the clang of metal on the gate. Don't wait up, Mum, I'll be late. Then you were gone. The echoes of that metal jangle still rankle as a last post and chorus for a lost son. I will never know if the river was your bed or if your limbs are still entwined around some broken scrap of metal or pipe of lead dug deep into the mud somewhere. All I know is that I should have known. That last note of the metal gate was too late. You see, you never would have left the coat. There are days I want a grave to kneel at, to dig my fingers into wet clay and to know your bones and flesh are sleeping now at rest. But I always knew the best of days were still too difficult for you. Other days I wait and watch the school or the road where you walked the 100 yards to get the school bus. And as a child, you thought that cobwebs were made of silver. I never told you otherwise. Now there is only us. And I look to see a blue ridge of gelled hair and the rattle of a bicycle chain slung low around your waist. Black eyeliner was in poor taste for a boy, according to your father. He left too, but not like you did. He sits by day at the windowsill waiting, wiping fogged up glass with bated breath and woolen elbows. His thoughts mixed up with memories and bits of things, and I sometimes think he knows. But then he stands and asks, is Aidan in yet? And on his way to bed, he touches the coat and tells me that he never read a science fiction book. And with a tender goodnight kiss, he asks me every single night, whose coat is this? Thank you. Thank you so much. How am I doing for time, Sandy? Do we have time for one more? Yeah? Thank you. Okay. Well, this one I particularly wanted to read for Sandy because Cultivating Voices has given me I suppose, the impetus to resurrect what I call the Belfast poems. And they're poems that I wrote quite a long time ago. And I suppose I hadn't considered them until the whole Brexit question came up, and then we looked like we're hurtling towards a border again. And for people like me who've lived through the Troubles, albeit not in the Troubles, we were very fortunate to be a few miles away from them, but we remember very well a lot of the heartache and really hope that that won't come back to visit us. But one of the heartaches that really stuck with me as a young woman was the heartache of strip searching of female prisoners in Macabre prison. And it continued long after people were in Macabre, and a typical example was Roisin McCalliskey, who was pregnant. She was strip searched 70 times while in custody. and was never found convicted. So this poem is really dedicated to anyone who was ever unfortunate enough to experience this. And like I said, the Belfast poems have come back out of retirement thanks to Cultivating Voices, and this too will be in the collection. So it's called Strip. O'Connell Street in an afternoon, you won't bump into a platoon of soldiers or a tank or the muzzle of a gun or some Liverpudlian mother's son in boots too big and heavy for his 19 years. And no one here fears the thoughts of being imprisoned. But it isn't all that far away that women rise to meet the day that stretches into screaming at Her Majesty's discretion. It's state-approved oppression, and if the bars that steel don't suffocate enough, these women must be tough, for they were in Macabre. Security, protection, no adequate detection are the reasons rhymed, and years it carries on, and fear becomes a choking grip as the sickening order filters down to strip. These women bleed with every passing day, and every month they get their periods, and sorrow calls and blackness when the rain falls outside the walls of Macabre. And nakedness becomes a sea of shame, and no amount of washing can remove the feel of filth or print of fingers. And rancor lingers long after any borders lifted. Thank you. So I don't always write sad and serious poetry, but do I have time for a tiny one, Sandy? Just the title poem? Okay, so just a really, really ironic situation. The title poem is called Crow's Books. And this, if you can see it, is a pine cone. But as when I was a child, my mother, there was lots of crows in the woods where we used to go. I thought we were going for a walk. We weren't. We were going to collect sticks for the fire. So it was probably child labor, or child's labor. But I used to ask my mother all the time, there was a rookery, where are all the crows going? And she said to me, oh, they're going to school. So I thought, perfectly feasible explanation. And then I found a pine cone and I said, Mom, what's that? And she said, Jesus, one of the crows lost its books. So for years, we in our family called pine cones Crow's Books. Really ironically, my mother, they turned those woods into a graveyard. She died 5 years ago and she's buried in Piltown Woods. And it's not sad for us when we go to visit because it was such a beautiful place. It still is. It's such a beautiful place, full of crows, full of trees. But this week, where I never ever thought, I'm actually moving into my mother's house, and every time you go out the back of my mother's house, there's crows. So crows are following me everywhere. And this is the title of the book, and it's dedicated to my mother, who thought all poetry was nonsense. But, you know, hey ho, she's been the inspiration for most of the poems in this book. And it's called Crow's Books, Piltown Woods with my mother. We watched the flight of 100 crows squawk their way to the sky-high trees. My mother said there were birds coming home from school. We rambled on in the dusk-damp woods, and a pine cone lay under rusty leaves. My mother laughed and said, oh, Jesus, one of the crows has dropped his books. Now a pine cone sits on a rough-hewn desk, and when I hold it, I am again 4 years old and hear again my mother's voice. So there's always Crow's Books in Piltown. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sandy. Thank you so much, Cultivating Voices, and thank you to everybody who joined in and tuned in to listen. Thank you so much.
And I love the book, as you know. The new book is Crow's Books. And do you have the cover with you?
Well, not on me. No, I don't. And that's, and as I said,
yeah, you're in transit. Yeah, no worries.
We're in transit. When I stop making revisions.
Oh, you're muted. There, we'll go.
Yeah, when I stop making revisions, which is, I promise you, is like days away. But I'll post the link to Cultivating Voices as soon as I can, and I think you have the PDF of the covers. So I'll post the link, and it'll definitely be in time for your Christmas stocking. And big thanks to the publisher for his endless patience.
I wanted to draw attention to the cover because it is actually a painting of Anne's, and it is a very just striking array of color. And I'm not a painter, so I don't know how to describe what I see, but there's a beautiful surrealism to it that just really draws me in to what seems like a forest of paint. And so not only are the poems wonderful, but they are enclosed by that beautiful cover. So be sure to take a look at the cover when which we do have on our event page and is on the Cultivating Voices. Thank you so much, Anne. What
Thank
a
you.
pleasure, of course. And Anne has read with us a number of times. It's a great pleasure and fanfare. And I always appreciate that range of humor and conscience. You know, that both are present simultaneously whenever I hear you read. So I look forward to a day when we can meet for a pint or something, or a coffee. And yeah, okay. In outside of Belfast. Thank you. Everyone, I wanna one of the real pleasures of the new book showcase is my sister had this wonderful idea. Hey, these are kind of short readings, you know, in contrast to the epic ones that you like to cultivate, like 3 hours and 4 hours long from time to time. She said, why don't you have a special surprise guest at the end of the new book showcase? And so we did it once, and it was really fun. So we continue to do it. And every time it just brings a big smile to my face when we can announce our surprise guest, even though you could probably look in the Zoom square and guess who the surprise guest is. But nevertheless, I am very, very excited to welcome our special surprise guests. Joining us today from New Orleans, where I understand from April Lee Fields that she gave up some busking today to come join us. So I'm super appreciative of that. So we get to have our own private busking in Zoom, if you can create an equivalent. The always, always soulful April Lee Fields. And let me just share with you a couple things. April has graced us in our Poetry Pride Parade, and with some technical difficulties in our National Coming Out Day Poetry March, all the more reason I'm very happy to have you back on a day when it appears we've had no technical difficulties so far. I'm knocking on all the wood in my apartment or in my house. And I want to just share with you a little bit about April. April very well could have been reading today in our new book showcase, because April has a new book of poetry called Wild Flower, as well as a very provocative memoir called A Version of You. And that adds to her other poetry book called Wanderlust. So without further ado, let me really, again, I so appreciate you joining us today. And let's book you for that new book showcase so we get you that 15-minute set. Thank you so much, April, for joining us today for as our special surprise guest and rounding out the reading for today.
Thank you so much for having me. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, cool. So I'm Oakley Fields, and this is my bassist Twigman, and we do poetry and music and stuff. And today I'm just going to read a poem for you guys from my book of poetry, Wildflower. And this poem was particularly special to me because it's who I kind of honored the book towards, and it's for my grandmother, my nanny. And it's a special piece to me because it was the first poem that I ever actually read in front of a crowd of people ever. You know, there's a lot of I think the journey between poetry and spoken word are two very different beasts, really, you know. So it's one thing being a quiet little writer and writing stuff, but then the ability to get up and say what you're saying is a whole nother thing. So I wrote this poem, and then I read this poem at my grandmother's funeral in front of all of my friends and my family, and most of them, to be honest, didn't even know that I was a writer at that time, you know. And I love it. You know, poetry, we're always looking for muses and people that inspire us or places that inspire us. And this was just one of them. So this is my book of poetry, Wildflower. And it's this poem is called Nanny. And I'm going to do it today for her. Nanny, you are love and woman encompassed, an attribute to the fairest kind. Your fists were worn hard and your tongue born sharp to digress injustices of any kind. You were a fighter and a believer. You were a speaker of the truth. And you would wear your face like a boy dared not provoke. You were in perpetual youth. And now I am older, and you have grown older with me. Now I am older, and now I see. Now I see. I see that you are fragile as a china shop. And while life is the bull inside, you are soft as the cheeks of your great-grandchildren's dreams, soft as the water is to the sky. Where you were, and you are. And it is a mixture solidified, floating like feathers in a kaleidoscope. You were, you are, you were, you are. And we are here because of you. For you mothered us all in your love and in your hope. In your love and in your hope. And we are the wild flowers in your garden, the rain from gathered clouds of time. We, your children, your children's children, and together we laugh, we mourn, we cry, for we watched you watching us. And we grew, we learned, we gave. And we became but replications of the love that you bore, and such a gift can never be stolen from the grave. And today we bear witness to your dualities, your fragility, and your strength, who you were and who you are, and who we became because of you. And we are indebted into length. Into length. And life is small and the world is large. But before leaving, you taught me one last thing, that love is large and that people are expandable. For I was swollen with it in your days of passing. Yes, I was swollen with it in your days of passing. And I would give anything just to hear your laughter pass through the silken air. To feel your skin against mine, I pray thee again, I pray thee again. Though now you are free as the lavender scented wind, the lavender scented wind. No matter if you were nor are, Nanny, you are ever present, our eternal love, ever present, our eternal love that knows no end. That's it. That's my poem, Nanny. Wildflower. Thank you so much. I'm April Fields. This is my bandmate Twigman. You can catch any of my stuff on my website, aprilleefields.com. Thank you so much for having us, Sandy. I really appreciate it. It doesn't matter about busking. I can go later. Yeah. It's all about the Fox party. Oh my God! It's all about the Fox party right now.
Patrick has one too, a mask of a fox.
I know, I saw it, and then I was like, I need to get my fox.
It's amazing. Oh, thank you so much. The story of I'm seeing you there at her service, and the extraordinary thought that people didn't know.
They had no idea. Half my family came up to me afterwards and said it was a beautiful poem. I had no idea that you were a writer. I also kind of had no idea what you were talking about most of the time through the poetry, but it was beautiful and it was touching and it was special.
Yeah, well, it was also special to hear today. Thank you, April Leafield, Twigman, always appreciate it. And again, how wonderful to hear from your new book, Wildflower, the title poem from the book. And I hope you'll come back and read more from the book. We've added one more special event to this day of, let me keep using it, remarkable occurrences, from the title of Patrick Lodge's book. And before I introduce Don Krieger, let me just also talk about him as a poet. Let me just say that we also owe him such a debt week after week. Don has been supportive of us technically with Cultivating Voices, and we've been having some challenges with my computer. And so for this past month, he's been just dedicated to joining me every week to use his account so we could keep going live. So it's so appropriate to have Don's poem follow April's poem. And let me just say, Don Krieger, if you've not heard his poetry, is also an exceptional poet of conscience. And Don's new book is Discovery. And Don will actually be reading in the new book showcase later this month. So Don, thank you for everything that you do. And thank you for the poem that you're about to share with us.
October 30, 2018. 3 of 11 killed at the Tree of Life's synagogue were buried. One of the 3 was husband to my coworker and friend. Unveiling. 11 lives taken at the Tree of Life. Hours later and miles away, our writing workshop canceled. Our chance for defiance, however small, gone. I waited at the funeral with hundreds to pass security. Newsboys on the street asking with their cameras, who is afraid? I watched her halting walk to his grave, reluctant like a child. I followed like a child with a shovel full of earth to cover him. I listened to the learned, seeking meaning, hundreds crowded into the Beth Shalom basement, police in armor at the entrance. When the doors locked behind us, I noticed the dampness and a draft on my bare neck. Today was 11 months, hundreds standing witness in the warmth beneath the trees. I still live, so I was there. I wonder though, would we cancel our workshop for a drive-by at a playground?
Thank you. Folks, you are listening today to Cultivating Voices, live poetry. And live poetry presents us with the opportunity to reflect, mourn, celebrate the true swath of what it means to be human. And we certainly have seen that exhibited today from Don Krieger, just reading his poem, Unveiling, from April Leafield's reading, performing Wildflowers, from Anne MacDonald, Patrick Lodge, and we began our reading today with Megan Alpert. Actually, all 5 of them have new books, but the first 3 were our featured readers in our new books showcase. I sincerely hope that you will consider purchasing one of these extraordinary collections and relive this moment that we've been able to share today as we are rounding the corners to the end of 2020 in the US, coming upon an election that we know has consequence, not just for US citizens, but the world. And as I always like to encourage people, please, here in the US, take your vote seriously. Because literally, I believe the world is counting on us. So be counted. Well, I would like to remind you that we at Cultivating Voices Live Poetry began at the end of March in response to the shutdowns. We're a private group. We're a public group, excuse me. All poets and beloveds of poetry are welcome to join the group. We're a very, very dynamic, active group during the week. As you know, folks can post their readings and events and musings and just connect with each other in worldwide community. I hope that you will join us together in community next Sunday for our first reading of November, our live special event for November from the Lost Horse Press anthology, Nasty Women, with your host, Julie Kane, and a really extraordinary pageantry of women poets. And as I mentioned at the top of the hour, if you joined us for our Raising Lily Ledbetter reading, that special event, you have an idea of what we are going to experience together. That is our first reading of November. On Sunday, November 8th, we will actually be hosting a post-election live open mic. And so anyone who wants to sign up to read, to share reaction, thoughts about the election, we're going to have an open forum as that live open mic. On November 15th, we have our new book showcase with Hilda Raz, Susan Eisenberg, Leslie Ullman, and Betsy Scholl. On the 22nd of November, we'll have another live open mic, and we'll actually close out the month with Don Krieger reading from his book, Discovery, along with Jan Beatty, and Lauren Russell, 3 poets from Pennsylvania. It's going to be a really amazing month of poetry in November, as it's been an amazing Sunday of poetry today. Thank you to all the poets today. I've been really looking forward to this reading, and it moved me in all the ways that I expected that it would, and many, many more. Well, my friends, thanks for joining us today. And as I always say when I sign off, I encourage you to be well, to stay safe, which means please, 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 please wear your masks. And look at what happens when we keep writing. We keep coming together. So please keep writing. Have a great week, and we'll see you very soon.